Today I'm going to give my nectarine tree a bit of a prune. My main objective here is not to kill the thing, and I'm not going to do that, but the reason I say it is on this property when we first bought it there was a nectarine tree and I was really excited about it, but I don't think it's going to make it. This year we had no edible fruit from it, and the last year again we didn't have anything. They all just rotted on the tree, and I'll show you why. This one on the other hand, I planted it myself and I was a bit kind of hesitant. I'd never pruned a tree. I was a bit nervous about cutting it because you pay for this beautiful thing and then you feel it's a shame to cut it. But anyway, I cut it into shape. It's now looking good and it's produced 20 fruit, and this is its second summer. So, and the fruit was amazing, really nice nectarines. So it's going well for it. Today, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a tidy up, but I'll also show you that other tree and show you what happens when it all goes wrong. And hopefully I'll show you how to avoid doing that. So this is that second tree. The first thing to say about it is it's absolutely massive. I can't even reach most of the fruit on it when it does come. A lot of the fruit actually comes off that branch there, which is pretty high up. I'll show you. You get a sense of that here. I mean, obviously you can get a ladder to get them, but it's not that easy. These branches have a little bit of fruit at these lower branches down here, but not a lot. That seems to be where most of the fruit is, and it's not a great situation. Ideally, you'd want your tree to have like one central leader, a main trunk, then with the branches coming out at that sort of angle with a decent spacing in between them all the way around the tree. Something like that would be ideal. What we've got here is just a mess, really. There's like that, I guess that would be the central leader because that's the biggest trunk, but then it's sort of a multi-trunked thing because these other branches have started to sprout out from the bottom, which sometimes can happen, but you should sort of prune them off, but they've started to shoot out from the bottom. So you have this series of trunks. There's loads of things that can happen with that because as the trunks at the bottom start to kind of like grow and get bigger, they crush the bark in between the two of them, and into that gap you can get disease, you can get rot. It hasn't happened yet because the trunks aren't big enough, but they will get bigger. This tree is at such a stage now where to prune it back into shape would take so much work. You can only really cut down a tree by 1/3 per year. So if I did that and kept pruning year after year, it would take me so long to get this tree into shape. Whereas the tree that I've planted over there gave me 20 fruit immediately. Next year it will probably give me 30 and so on. It just doesn't make sense to keep this. So unfortunately, I'll just have to kind of cut the tree down and kill it, which is a shame, but it's just not worth getting it into shape. So although it hasn't died through disease just yet, it's effectively dead. When I first put this in the ground, I cut the trunk to about chest high. You can just see where that cut was made. And from that point, the branches are then coming out like this. So you end up with a kind of a goblet shape, or what people call a V shape. So that's one method of doing it, but you don't have to go that way. You could also go an A shape, which would be similar to sort of a Christmas tree shape. And the slight disadvantage for me with that is that that shape will just naturally get larger because you've got this big trunk coming up. And then I guess there's nothing wrong with having a big tree, you get more fruit. The difficult thing is if you want to net the fruit, it's difficult, or if you've got to climb up a ladder to get them, it's tricky. And anyway, I haven't got loads of space, so I'd rather have lots of small trees than one huge one. When it comes to pruning trees, I would say the best time is now, February. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, it's February because that's after everything has fruited, and if you're in the northern hemisphere, it's February because that's the winter when the plants aren't doing anything and they're dormant, so that's a good time to do it. So this has just given fruit, and so now is a good time to give it a prune. I prune once in the winter and then once again in the summer. And the difference between the two is that in the summer the fruits have already come out, and therefore you're just sort of doing a bit of a tidy up. The tree isn't going to burst into growth following this prune. However, in the winter, it's all about the tree's potential. So immediately after you've pruned, spring happens and then the tree will grow. So you're sort of promoting growth in the areas that you want the tree to grow into. If you watch someone that works in an orchard or something, they go around and they just prune incredibly quickly, and it's kind of quite confusing. So what I do is I break it down into little jobs, and I finish each job and then start on the next one, and it makes it way easier. So the first thing that I do is look for dead, dying or diseased pieces of wood, and I remove those. There's not an awful lot that's dead or dying on this tree. I mean, there's that's not great, just blown off in the wind. I'll get rid of that, but other than that, I think that's about it. The next job is I'm going to get rid of some of the crowding. So inside this central area, the whole point of cutting it like into a V shape is so that the light can get in and the fruit will ripen better. But with all that space, it means that a lot of the branches then start to grow into it, or they're growing kind of directly up. And these branches that grow directly up, water sprouts, they're not going to hold fruit anyway. So you're just getting a load of leaf matter inside this central area, which is no good. So I'm going to remove all of that. So you can see there's a decent amount of space now in the middle, and that will let light in. And I'll probably leave it there for a summer prune, but if it was a winter prune, I'd keep going a bit more. So the next thing to look out for, I think, is anything that's crossing. So branches that are just going to rub and get in the way of each other. I would get rid of those for a winter prune. There's an example here. And then after that, it gets a bit tricky, because I think all the next steps are really like a kind of either or situation. I'll show you what I mean. Since we're in summer, I'm actually going to leave this, just because the more leaves, the better at this stage, I figure, just pumping more energy back into the roots and into the plant in general. But for the winter, I'll cut this, and you can see you've got one branch going here, so that's this branch here, and one branch going along here. And the spacing between these is about right, I think. It's just this bit here, as it's growing up, is then going into this branch. So you've got two branches, and with all the wind, they're just going to rub together. You've got more chance of disease, and it's not like you can get fruit on both. So it's the kind of decision where you've got to choose either or. So either this needs to come off, or alternatively, you could probably get rid of that one there. And I mean, in this situation, hard to say. It's difficult, and a lot of the decisions are a bit like that, where you think, well, either would do. You know, in the end, I mean, I might choose to keep this one because the branch is slightly thicker, and it's also got more coming off it, so more chance of fruit production in the future, whereas this is just one little branch all on its own. So I might choose to ditch that one, but it's not like there's a kind of definite rule here. At this stage, you're really going through and choosing which branch do you think can hold the most fruit. You know that phrase, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. It's very true, particularly when you've got a pair of secateurs in your hands and you're right inside the tree, and you just end up sort of cutting too much. So it's a good idea every now and again to just put everything down and stand back and look at it. So at this stage, just looking at the way that looks, I would say I'd probably like trim it all in a bit if this was winter. So if you look at the height of those upper branches, some of those branches, you know, they're very thin. They're like this thin, so there's probably like this much growth on them that maybe doesn't need to be there. So you could cut that back, and that will allow the rest of the branch to get thicker, stronger, and to hold more fruit. I think these end bits are probably a bit too long. I'll give you a sense of it. So you can see here, I mean, these branches up here, you know, they're pretty small. I probably wouldn't want fruit coming up to here. So, I mean, I would probably chop off maybe this much of it, probably like this much off each one of these as well. But that would be good for winter. If this tree wasn't quite so big, I probably would give it a go and try and get it back into shape. But I think this one's a bit too far gone. But if you've got something that's maybe not quite as bad as this, you could definitely get it back into shape. So if it was me, I would choose a central leader. So these are all coming from the bottom. This is not a grafted tree, I don't think. I don't see the graft on it. So likelihood is someone just planted a nectarine stone down here and then it's grown up. I would have thought that this would have been the main trunk at some point. It probably died out, and then as a result, all these other ones came up from the bottom. So the best thing to do in that situation, I think, would be to choose one of them as your central leader, as your main trunk, and ditch the rest. So in this situation, You can see just here, that is the biggest. I would try to keep that. At the moment, the branches that are coming out of that, the laterals, they're like tiny. What you want is for those lateral branches to be roughly a third as thick as the main trunk. At the moment, they're, I mean, I'll show you, they are absolutely, I mean, bearing in mind that this trunk, let me wrap my hand around that. Yeah, so I can't fit my hand around that trunk, so it's about this sort of size. And these are the branches coming off. So those are obviously not going to hold fruit. And so every single branch going up there is not really doing that much until it gets to right up there at sort of whatever that is, 8 foot, and then it splays out. So it's kind of difficult to get at the fruit. I would be tempted to, yeah, firstly ditch these side branches, and then I would cut that central leader much lower, probably like the other one, probably to about here, and hope that you'd start to get branches coming out at about that height. You could theoretically do that to this one, but the issue is you really don't want to remove more than a third of the tree per year. Otherwise you could end up killing it. So with that in mind, this would take several years to get it back into shape. And like I said, that other tree I've only had in the ground for 2 summers and it's already giving plenty of fruit. I got 20 off it. This probably had about, I don't know, not that many, maybe 30 or 40, but you can see there's a lot of them on the tree still. They just all went rotten. I'm not 100% sure why they went rotten. My guess is that the tree itself in general is very unhealthy, and once you've got an unhealthy tree, the fruits aren't great, and then bugs are more attracted to those trees. And it's funny because people say that about vegetable gardening as well. They'll sort of say, well, if they're not healthy, then bugs prefer those less healthy leaves because because bugs are doing the job of breaking that stuff down, so they're actually going for the unhealthy bits. It's definitely true with vegetables, and I think the same is true of trees. Like that tree over there doesn't really have that many bugs on it. You look at this one, there's quite a lot of, they're actually passion vine hoppers, these little things, and there's quite a lot of them over the tree. So it just makes looking after it really, really difficult. And so the amount of time and energy I would put into getting this into shape, probably not worth it. Just buy a small one from the nursery and start again. I planted this tree last winter, and when I put it in, I decided not to prune it. I would normally prune things immediately, but the soil quality wasn't very good here. There was a lot of clay, and I thought I'll just leave it, let it get established, let it get some leaves and get some energy into the roots, and then prune it the following year. But you can see here what happens when you don't prune. So it's incredibly narrow. I can't even reach the top. It's grown so much. It was probably about this big, I think, when I put it in. So all of this growth, it's just a huge amount of growth, but it's all vertical. So there's just not very much room for it to hold fruit. So in order to get this to come out, to make it a bit more like the nectarine tree, I would probably look to maybe to cut around this area or potentially around here. And what I'd be looking for is whether I can find some growth that's coming out laterally. You know, I want ideally something at this kind of angle, maybe 45-ish degrees. The problem with them growing, when the branches are growing like that, there's just not that much space for them to hold fruit. If they grow too far out like that, there's obviously going to be a lot of leverage. And it's a good way of looking at it when you're pruning. You know, if you think of holding a weight and then you hold it out from your body, you know, that's a huge amount of leverage that is going to be on a tree trunk. So if a lateral branch grows way out over here and then has a cluster of, I don't know, 5 fruit on it, think of all of that weight pulling down, and it can actually destroy trees. I've seen it happen where there's a lot of fruit on the tree, and then you get high wind, and then as that pulls down and rips the branch, one, you can get disease around the branch where the break is, but also I've seen it actually tear out about half of the trunk and just rip it out, and then you've killed your tree. And it's such a shame because you spend a lot of time and effort over the years with trees, so you'll sort of want to look after them ideally. That style of pruning I've been using on the nectarine tree and all the other trees actually, where I'm removing the trunk quite low and then allowing the branches to come out in a V or a goblet shape. It feels quite destructive at first, especially when you've just bought the tree, because you're removing so much wood. But when you think about it, the tree can put energy into its roots, into its fruits, or into the branches and the leaves. And so, you know, by cutting away from those branches, you're not going to kill it. I promise you. You do feel like that when you're doing it. The first time I did, I thought, oh man, this is like way too much, but it works. You cut it back and there is energy in the tree from its root system, and it will continue to produce. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, and I will see you next week.